Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. Today we'll talk about labor and welfare with the Labor and Welfare Secretary, Mr. Law Chi-kwong. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for sitting with us and for making time for this. Now, I would like to start with, quite frankly, a heartbreaking case that shocked us all. Since Christmas Eve last year, dozens of toddlers was found allegedly abused in the care home run by the Society for the Protection of Children. A very simple question for you. How can you assure the Hong Kong people that something like this won't happen again?
Well, that will make an effort for both the government, or within the government, the Social Welfare Department, and all the relevant NGOs to work together to make sure what presumably in the past we will presume would happen because they are children protection agencies, that they should have all the due diligence to make sure nothing of this kind would happen. But it seems to us that that is perhaps a bit taken for granted in the past, and that needs to be seriously addressed.
So, are there any measures that's currently in the pipeline to prevent a repeat?
Oh, definitely we have to look at all the procedures in terms of monitoring and how NGOs who are providing such services to ensure they have mechanism, policy, and procedure in place to ensure this won't happen again. And also we have to review our own monitoring process, how to oversee how these operations can be delivered. And that will be a lot of efforts that the government and the NGOs have to work together to make sure it won't happen again.
Okay, speaking of the overall child affair in Hong Kong, a few months ago, that's around the same time span with the Mong Kok care home case, a couple was jailed for abusing a child in their care. Now, the girl later succumbed to head injuries at the age of merely 22 months. Now, are there any measures in your capacity to prevent abusing behavior, perhaps in a private household, not like the case in the Mong Kok care home, in private setting, and especially during the pandemic when alleged abuse cases are on the rise?
Definitely, the work has to start from prevention. And the prevention work actually starts from the day of birth of the child. So there should be concerted efforts, and we are having it now, together from the hospital authority, the Department of Health, and also the Social Welfare Department and other relevant agencies, to identify risks of such possibility at the very beginning. We all know that for this unfortunate tragedy, mostly it happened in families that are really challenged. And this information actually would be available at the time of the birth of the child. And you know that every child born in Hong Kong, they have to undergo several, for example, vaccinations and also checkups, and which happens starting from day one in the hospital and then later on in our maternal and child care centers. So there are collaborating efforts, and we're reviewing the procedures to ensure such prevention can start in the early days, not until such an abuse happens. And then on the other hand, we need legal instruments that would help us to make it very clear, and the message very clear to the community, that such things should not be tolerated. And at the same time, that the duty of care and the duty to report are necessary to ensure that if unfortunately such events happened, that someone can take immediate actions or remedial actions to ensure it won't happen again. So from prevention and early intervention will be the key in the future efforts to ensure that such accidents or incidents would happen that frequent.
Now you talk about legal instrument as part of the concerted effort to prevent a repeat. And we know that following the string of incidents, work is now underway in the Legislative Council to mandate the reporting of child abuse cases. You've said that strict penalties are necessary to punish this kind of behavior. How far do you think the penalty should go?
Well, this is a subject that requires detailed deliberations and discussion among all the stakeholders. Because when we are talking about compulsory reporting or mandating reporting as such, we always have to bear in mind the possibility of over-reporting, which will divert limited resources. No matter how much we are going to invest more in the future, they will always be limited. And therefore, we need to ensure that the legislation will not be kind of overdone, so that the whole system is overwhelmed by very trivial events. And because they also involve a lot of professions. And currently, under the existing, for example, legislation of the registration or certification or related to the code of practice, that may have things that are not particularly consistent with the idea of mandatory reporting, such as the extent or the message related to confidentiality. Because confidentiality, to a certain extent, are contrary to reporting. Because when you report, you have to breach the confidentiality understanding. So limited confidentiality has to be in place to ensure that under certain situation that they have to report.
But how do you prevent that kind of confidentiality, which is in some sense a sort of privilege, from being abused in cases like this? And wouldn't under-reporting cause more damage than over-reporting in this case?
The whole issue is how to strike the right balance, to avoid over-reporting and to avoid under-reporting, and how to strike the balance.
That's the crux.
Because most of these professions are helping professions. And helping profession has to rely on the trust relationship between the client and the profession. So somehow confidentiality is a way of how to ensure that trust or rapport can be built. But then if that can be contrary to the best interest of the client, that is how the law should be stepping in. So how to strike a balance that require the right description within the code of practice and the necessary training provided to the professions so that they know how to draw the line. Under what kind of circumstances. What we are talking right now is when it's involving imminent and severe damage to the child, then it should be reported. But then how to clearly spell out the meaning of severe and imminent is an important task, and that requires a lot of work for many different professions in terms of training and education.
Now, I understand that it's difficult to strike a balance in any policy, to be very honest, but it seems like the government is always playing catch up when a scandal arises, when a damage has already been done. So are there any mechanisms that we can count on to preempt such problems, to preempt such tragedies from happening in the first place? And if there is, why do they fail?
Well, in terms of events happening, mostly if they are something that can be predicted and prevented, then they will be prevented. And that we will have measures, no matter it's policy, procedures, or even legislation to do that. But the world is changing, and there are things happening from time to time that are not predicted, or at least, to a certain extent, no consensus has been built up to a certain point of time until a particular event happened that will help the consensus to be built. And that is the difficult part in a pluralistic society. There are always people thinking that we should do more, and there are always people thinking that we should do less.
But when you're a policymaker and trying to make a decision, what will be your priorities when you're trying to chart a balanced resolution to some of the problems?
Well, that is no hard and fast rule, I guess. It depends on the circumstances, and values actually in a society has been changing. In issues like childcare, some 30 or 40 years ago, we considered childcare is primarily a family business. It's something that parents should take the full responsibility of taking care of children. But now, because children are so precious, yes, the family, the parents should still be the primary responsibility. But the society also share some of this kind of caring, developing, and protection role. So somehow the values of the society change over time. And that's why legislation has to keep up with the changing values of the society.
Of course, related to birth rate, right, and population growth in the region, especially when Hong Kong are seeing declining population growth, and that have largely to do with equality childcare as well. But we'll pick it up after the break, and we'll talk about the labor market in just a minute. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us.